Right, epidemiology. Epi means on top of, demos means the people. So you've heard demi or demo in the past because democracy is government by the people. Epidemiology then is a study of things that are put on people, diseases in populations. It doesn't only mean infectious disease, it could be any disease. Epidemiologist is somebody who studies. For example, Jon Snow. The extra credit assignment number 2 for homework is all about Jon Snow, and not that Jon Snow, the fictional character, the real life Jon Snow, who's considered one of the founders of epidemiology. He was more of not much of a fighter. He's mentally a fighter, but not with swords, but with with pen and paper. And he had an aggressive mind, and he fought the establishment, and he changed the minds of people, of leaders, of how diseases spread across populations. So some words now. You've heard that we went through a pandemic. Pandemic is an epidemic that crosses international borders. It's originally epidemic that crosses geographic borders like mountains and oceans, but thanks to our air travel system, mountains and oceans don't really matter anymore. It's how countries keep the sick from crossing their borders. That's what matters. So now when it crosses an international border, it's called a pandemic. An endemic, however, is what COVID is now. COVID has now become an endemic. So epidemic is a sudden rise in the number of cases over a certain time period. An endemic it's not a rise, it's not a fall, it's that every year by year, decade after decade, there's a certain percentage of the population that's always having it. Not the same people. The people change, but the percentage more or less stays the same. The best example I've used for an endemic is asthma in New York City. If you work as an emergency response ambulance worker in Queens or Brooklyn, typical 40-hour week, 8-hour shift, then you would see about one asthma emergency a week, somewhere in the counties of Queens or Brooklyn. If you worked in Manhattan, you'll see about one asthma emergency. You'll be called to an asthma emergency about once per shift, depending on which part of Manhattan you respond to. If you work in the Bronx, you will get 2 to 3 asthma emergencies per shift, about one every 3 or 4 hours on average. There'll be a 911 call for somebody in the Bronx having an asthma emergency. And it doesn't seem to change much. I mean, yeah, year by year, maybe it'll go up or down a couple percent, but it's always there. What's going on? Well, I'll talk about it a little bit in the infectious disease lecture, which is in next week or a couple of weeks. But that's an endemic. It's not a sudden rise in the number of people with asthma. It seems like a percentage of the population always seems to have it. And there are theories, about what causes asthma, why people get asthma, but we'll talk about it in the infectious disease lecture. Okay, so history of epidemiology. I don't teach history class, I teach health classes, so I'm not going to test you on history like dates or people's names, but to help you understand where this study of epidemiology came from. It's really the ability of the government or the organization of leaders of a group of people, like how much can they handle? How much can they handle and be responsible for the health of their people? Ancient times, 1,000 years ago, they didn't spend a shilling, they didn't spend a drachma, they didn't spend a bushel of wheat on trying to make their people healthier. They didn't invest in hospitals. They didn't have hospitals then. So And not because they're evil people, not because they didn't care, just the science and the infrastructure could not support it. They could barely communicate across their country, get any messages at all. So trying to have some kind of public health organization was just out of the question. But as infrastructure got better, roads got better, ability to communicate across long distances got better, ability to maintain documents got better, then these leaders who did care had the tools to see if they could somehow reduce the levels of diseases in their population. And then the next rate limiting step then was the understanding of diseases, because if the smartest people, your smartest advisors and counselors, told you that health was a matter of keeping the gods happy, and the only reason why somebody would get sick is because they made one of the gods upset, then the most logical reason, the most logical response among the most intelligent people in your kingdom is to find a way to please the god. Make sacrifices, make a donation, live a good life, repent of your sins, all of that good stuff, right? So that's where your health efforts would be focused, making the god happy. Once the germ theory of disease and the invention of the microscope showed people that no, diseases were not caused by angry spirits. It was caused by a tiny, tiny little animal that's floating around the water and the food we drink. And if it gets into us, then it'll make us sick. And there are other diseases that are not caused by microorganisms, but just the way we lived. And of course, there's infections too. I mean, infections from accidents too. And so now we're talking like the Renaissance now. We've left the ancient world behind. We're now talking about the Renaissance. And then the intelligent thing to do with that upgraded information is, okay, so let's do something about microorganisms. Let's do something about personal behaviors where we reduce the risk of getting sick in the first place, and that's public health. The word quarantine, which today means isolate the sick individual from the rest of the population so they don't spread it around, came from the Black Death. The Black Death was one of the largest and most famous plagues, pandemics in ancient times. It's around the Middle Ages, and back then it swept across Europe, killing about a third, not 1/3%, but a third, as in a third of all white people were killed in only like only a few decades. It had phenomenal and profound effects across society. Losing that many people cannot help but change the way things were done. But anyway, it was an absolute terror. We have the plague doctors, those pictures of these people walking around with black suits and this long snouted mask. Looks like a bird, like a cosplaying a creepy bird. And those were days when they barely understood the germ theory of disease. They didn't even discover the germ theory of disease and microscopes yet. So they were definitely very much into the spiritual cause of sickness. But by then, some smart people were thinking, it's not just the gods, but like hanging around somebody who made the gods happy. Like the one hanging around somebody who was cursed by the gods might make you cursed too. So I don't know how this works, but if I see somebody with the plague, I'll stay far away just so I don't get guilty by association. So they practice quarantine. The actual word, what was the fastest mode of travel, which means the fastest mode of transmission or spread of disease in the ancient world? And it was by boats. So when a strange ship appeared over the horizon and started to come into port, and the city was not yet wiped out by the Black Plague, they would signal to that ship, do not come ashore. If you come ashore, you will be fired upon. because we don't want you bringing the Black Plague into our city, into our town. And so the ship would say, she would signal back, I swear we're okay, we're not sick, none of us are sick, please, we have perishable cargo, we need to sell it on the market, we need to stay in business. And the city leader said, no, you stay out. And then finally they said, look, what do we have to do to prove to you that we don't have the plague on our ship? So the city leaders thought about it and said, all right, you stay out there for 40 days. And if you still, after 40 days, we can't see any signs of the plague, then you can come ashore. Where did this number 40 come from? Did anybody hear the story? Because the pandemic caused all kinds of the COVID pandemic caused all kinds of influencers to talk about history and stuff like that. Did anybody know where the 40 came from? Because if they don't know the germ theory, how are they supposed to know about the incubation period of the Black Plague? No guesses? Have you heard the number 40 in any kind of ancient context? Any kind of ancient literature? Very, very old book? Oh, somebody in the hallway? No clue? Didn't your elders, never heard your elders say the number 40? Yes? In the Bible. What about the Bible? Where did the number 40 appear in the Bible? Because it's usually number 7. Jesus was sent out into the wilderness and tested by the devil for 40 days and 40 nights. That's where they got the number 40 from, these city leaders. So they said, if it's good enough for Jesus, then it's good enough for us. So if we're going to test you for the amount of time that Jesus was tested, if you're still healthy, look healthy, then okay, you can come ashore. What's the word 40 in Spanish? Does anybody here speak Spanish? What? 40. So that's where the word quarantine, the Italian word for 40 is similar. So now we have quarantine. So of course nowadays we don't isolate somebody for 40 days, but by now, depending on the disease we're talking about, we can either hold on to them for the incubation period, or wait until through blood tests or other tests, the person no longer is shedding viruses or bacteria. They are safe to walk among the public once again, and then that's quarantine. Okay, this pandemic that we just went through, the COVID pandemic, is not the first pandemic, because the plague was well documented before. It's not even the first respiratory pandemic. There's been many, many others. And it's not even the first massive pandemic. The first massive respiratory pandemic happened in 1918 to 1919. It killed over 25 million people. And if that number doesn't impress you, remember that the world population was a lot smaller then. It's over 8 billion now. Actually, how big was it? Here, Google. World population 1918. 2 billion, so barely under 2 billion, so 1/4 the size of our population today, and 25 million. So if you want to put it in perspective, you have to multiply by 4. So it's like if COVID killed 100 million people today. That's how bad the 1918 flu pandemic was. How did it spread? If they didn't have transoceanic airplanes then, like we do now, how did it spread around the world? Wherever it started, how did it spread? Well, what happened around that time that took young men from all over the world and sent them to other places all over the world? Any guesses? What happened in 1918 that took young men from all over the world and sent them to other places all over the world. World War I. So on top of the shooting and the killing, there was also infected people spreading the influenza virus all over the world, sending them to boot camp and then sending them to battlefronts and then sending the survivors back home. So this virus got a lot of good vehicles to ride on. It's, if you Google or get into the history a little bit, it's been called the Spanish flu, and not because it started in Spain, but in World War I, Spain was neutral. So what happened was, it was happening everywhere, all over the world, but every other country was a participant in World War I, which means their propaganda was in full steam. So they had to always show the public that everything was fine, that they were winning, and that there was nothing bad happening. So as there was a full-fledged pandemic or epidemic in their country, they couldn't admit it. So their newspapers never mentioned any kind of influenza disease spreading among their population, killing millions, because it would be demoralizing. It would make people feel sad and not want to support the war effort. So the only country that was free to talk about this healthcare disaster was Spain, and therefore people associated it with Spain, Spanish flu. There's actually, the predominant theory was that this influenza pandemic started somewhere in the United States. And then what are you supposed to do? Well, nowadays we know what is a way to slow the spread of a viral respiratory outbreak. We lived through it. Can you mention one? Masks. Can somebody else mention one? You just lived through that. What's another one? Masks. What else? Okay, quarantine the individuals, but that's if we catch them, right? How about we don't know if an individuals do or do not have it. So how do we slow it from spreading around a population? What? I don't know if they had it. If their science was up to the speed to make a vaccine in time. Social distancing, yes. So the health leaders recommended masks and to stop public gatherings, to maintain social distancing. But every time they tried to suggest it, mayors on up, mayors, governors, the president, and everybody associated with them kept giving them the same reply. Are you crazy? There's a war on. We have to win the war. So no, we're not going to cancel the parade. No, we're not going to cancel boot camp. No, we're not going to tell people to wear masks. That'll freak them out. So no, none of this was done. Until like the war was starting to wind down, and then they started to entertain some of these ideas. And guess what the public's reaction was to mask and social distancing? You don't really have to guess too hard. You just look around what the public reaction was to our COVID pandemic, and it was pretty much the same. It was people were complaining it's a violation of their rights, that it felt the masks were uncomfortable, it made it hard to breathe. So everything that was happening in all of the public reaction to the COVID response 2 years ago, we saw back in 1918, 100 years ago, over 100 years ago. So since then, there have been many, many other pandemics. Avian flu, so the bird flu you're hearing about lately is just the next go around. It ran through the world some time ago, and then people ignored it, and it's coming back around again. It's a different strain, I guess. Why do we care about bird flu? Because so far, yeah, it's been shown to infect a few farm people, a few farm workers, and cats. Apparently, the cats who drink the raw milk out of cows, they seem to be getting it too. But it doesn't cause the humans who get it to give it to other people. So why do we care? Uh, why today, or even back then, why back then, a few years ago, every time bird flu showed up, avian flu showed up, they were destroying whole herds of cows. If it showed up in one chicken, they would destroy the entire warehouse full of chickens. Why so drastic? Because that's what was causing the price of eggs to go crazy. Have you guys, at least did you guys were aware of what was happening to the price of eggs? They started $2, then went up to $6 a dozen, and then $3, and then $4. It's just jumping all over the place. It's because of this. They're destroying the chickens. So every time they wipe out an entire generation of chickens, the price of eggs go up. So why go through all of this? It's because two things. If viruses are always mutating, so it seems like every month or every other month there's a story of another strain of COVID hitting the populace. And if you ever wonder why there's always these new strains of COVID, why can't scientists, get their act together? A very well-known person once said, "Life finds a way." So, trying to control life in all of its infinite variations is impossible. And viruses mutate. In fact, everything mutates. Humans mutate too. Your cells, some of your cells are mutating right now, but they will likely not go anywhere because your body does a great job of detecting the mutations and destroying it. But individual viruses, well, if they mutate, then if one of them has a genetic advantage somehow by accident, then it'll spread more and faster and in other ways. So what we're worried is that if one of these avian influenza viruses mutate so it can be spread from one person to another, now we've got a problem because one human can infect two humans. One can go to the supermarket, infect people in the supermarket. Somebody can go into the subway, infect people in the subway. Somebody can hop on an airplane and travel from JFK to Paris, France, and then it spreads there. So that's the panic. That would be the panic. And then if there ever is a mutation that causes human-to-human spread, then the WHO and the CDC and the governments of the world will start. We may have another lockdown if it ever gets to that. The other reason that avian flu gets special attention among respiratory illnesses is that birds don't respect our borders. Birds fly over mountains. Birds can fly across ocean barriers, across oceans. Some birds can migrate across oceans. So who cares, or they don't care if we set up checkpoints and roadblocks at the border. They'll just fly right over it. So one bird infects another bird, that bird flies across the national border, goes into another country, and then infects people. So we've got rapid spread, and that if there ever is a new strain of avian flu that does go from people to people, that's probably going to cause the next lockdown. You've heard of Ebola. It's a viral hemorrhagic fever. So fever means fever, hemorrhagic means bleeding. People who are infected with the Ebola virus start bleeding out from everywhere. Hemorrhagic. So they start bleeding out of their ears, their nose, their eyeballs, and highly infectious. There was one case of infection here in the United States. An immigrant was found to have it in Texas, and he was immediately quarantined. And then the nurse, who was one of the nurses who was treating him, had the full spacesuit on, except that there was one air gap between her hood and her gown. And the virus traveled into that gap, got on her neck, infected her. Very contagious. And so, but the government and the system response was so effective that we were able to control it and prevent it from spreading in this country. One of the reasons why Ebola spread so much in which continent? Which continent? Africa. One of the reasons, sub-Saharan, so it's actually the west coast of the Central African nations. One of the reasons why it was so hard to control the spread of it is because in that region, the tradition, the culture was for family members to bathe the body of the deceased as a sign of respect. And it was really hard to get them to stop doing that, because by bathing the body, then these family members were covering themselves with the Ebola virus. And then they would, after the funeral, they would go on to infect other people, to spread it around. It still pops up from time to time in that country, that part of the country, part of the continent, I mean. Zika was a big flash a few years ago. It's about 5-10 years ago. And it's neurologic. It's a virus that affects the nervous system. And it came out of South America. And so of course, Americans didn't care that news about Zika was percolating through the Google Health News system. But then it started showing up in Texas, Florida, Louisiana, and then Americans started caring. Zika is spread by mosquito and body fluids. So it doesn't spread as fast as a respiratory illness. So future pandemics. So COVID, what I'm trying to say is COVID is not the first massive pandemic. And I'm now going to say it's not the last. What's happening is, as the civilization keeps pushing out into the wilderness and cutting trees, going into places that humans have never been before, then there are chances that eventually they'll find another virus that we never had contact with before. And the problem is that we only have defenses to the microorganisms that we know of because we've been exposed to them previously. So the people who are alive today are the survivors. The people who are alive today are the children of those that survived the bacteria, the virus, the parasites from ancient times. If we were to run into a brand new virus that nobody has built resistance to, then it's like open buffet time for that virus. None of us have defenses. We don't have antibodies. We don't have the DNA to protect us from that virus or that bacteria. And the more we push out into the wilderness, the more likely it is that we'll run into one of those. Another one is the global warming, causing the ice caps to melt. And that's a problem in itself, because if all of that water flowing into the ocean will raise ocean levels. These layers of ice that were built up over millions of years covered over bacteria and viruses that existed millions of years ago, but then got wiped out in the rest of the world because of competition, whatever. And then by the time humans separated from primates, those viruses were not anywhere around the earth at the time. So here we go, warming the planet, melting the ice caps down, and layer by layer, those viruses that have never been encountered by humans before are now thawed out and free to float around. So some researcher will inhale that virus, or some oil driller will inhale that virus, work their way down to the port, and then catch a boat ride to an airport and come to JFK Airport by the end of the year, and then be in a subway seat next to you that evening. And that could cause the next pandemic. What I'm saying is, we will never get rid of pandemics because we can't get rid of life. Viruses is a version of life. We cannot contain life. Life just happens. Life finds a way. All we can do is be prepared for the pandemics. We can't stop pandemics. We can only be prepared, which means we take a very close and hard look at how we handled the last one and learn from it and try not to make as many mistakes for the next one. As documentation got better, as science got better, as very smart people learned from the findings of the previous generation and left their results to be learned by the next generation. And then we got to the germ theory of disease and the microscopes, and then somebody invented vaccines, so the medical knowledge kept advancing. And then we switched from diseases, something completely random that we have no control over, to diseases, something that has a pattern. And if we can understand the pattern, maybe we can get ahead of it. Because the easiest, fastest, cheapest, least painful way to deal with a disease is to not let people get sick in the first place. Prevention is always better than waiting for somebody to become sick and then finding the cure. And that is the epidemiologist's job, to look at graphs and graphs and graphs, numbers and numbers and numbers, and then somewhere on that graph is a telltale blip, a bump or a dip, and through their expertise and experience, they say, aha, there you are, and start deep diving and seeing that something is cooking in the populace, and what can we do to head it off so that we can prevent this spread, prevent harm and suffering from the population, some famous names, the most famous names in infectious disease and epidemiology. I'm not going to test you on any of these names, but if you want to avoid looking dumb at a conversation among healthcare providers, it would be good to be familiar with these names. The microscope really changed the world, because it's one thing to say things and draw pretty pictures, that's one thing, but to actually let people see with their own eyes, that was what really changed people's minds. Because if I put a glass of clear water in front of you, tastes great, and you're thirsty, it's been a hot day, that clear glass of water seems absolutely pristine, like how could it possibly be anything wrong with it? Then we take a drop of the water, put it in the microscope, and then let you look into it. And there it is. Instead of pure water, you see literally an ecosystem. Tiny, tiny creepy crawlies running around, eating each other, pooping and peeing and farting into that water. And now they're trying to tell you, see, this is why we need to boil the water so it doesn't make you sick. And now you see it with your own eyes, and now you understand. Vaccines, I will talk about in more detail in the infectious disease lecture, saves lives. No matter what you hear from conspiracy theorists, yes, vaccines have a side effect. Everything in medicine has a side effect. A Band-Aid has a side effect. Riding in an ambulance has a side effect. But the benefits of these therapies outweigh the risks. So when we're talking about saving millions and millions of lives, yes, sometimes the side effect is so severe that a few people do die. The side effects sometimes are so severe that it has killed people. But you're sitting there in the public health office and you're talking to the governor or the political person in charge of actually making it happen. And you have a choice now. Do you not release the vaccine because it might kill some people? Or do you release the vaccine because it's going to save thousands of people in your community or hundreds of thousands of people in your nation? That's why governments give the go-ahead to vaccines. The Salk and Sabin might be familiar to parents, you parents, because as soon as your kid was born, like that day, or within 72 hours, they got the Salk and Sabin vaccine. Thanks to them, smallpox and polio have been wiped out in the United States. Oh, do you guys know what polio looks like? It debilitates the bone growth, among other things, and it causes this kind of these children to live a challenged life. So this was prevented in the U.S. The news article was saying that efforts are being undertaken to try to get the polio vaccine out there, so that these kids who do survive that war-torn area are able to grow up without dealing with this. Okay. So that, and then Jon Snow is the extra credit assignment. The video is a very entertaining video. I should play it. I don't know. Should I? Because I don't want to get my video community struck for copyright. It's very entertaining. It's a cartoon. They took the story and turned it into a detective mystery, and they showed it as a cartoon characters, and the narrator is very engaging, and it's not some old guy droning on like I do. Okay, so it's as a video on its own merit, it's worth watching. It's fun to watch. But now you'll learn something too, and on top of that, you'll gain some extra credit off of it. So go to the extra credit assignment and follow the directions. Okay, so those were pandemics of infectious organisms, but there's other kinds of pandemics, because remember, a pandemic is a disease, a sudden rise in the rates of a disease across the international borders, no matter the cause. And here is another pandemic that's been out for a while, and it's the pandemic of lifestyle disease, which is a fancy official way of saying obesity is going up all over the world. Obesity, which is caused, the most common cause of obesity is high blood pressure, uncontrolled high blood pressure. I'm sorry, the other way. Obesity is the most common cause of high blood pressure, and uncontrolled high blood pressure is the most common cause of heart disease, and heart disease kills more people worldwide than anything else. It's the number one cause of death in all charts. Obesity also contributes to stroke and cancer, and also obesity plays a part in uncontrolled diabetes. And so the obesity, now, there are many ways to end up obese. It could be genetic, it could be environmental. In fact, obesity is itself a multifactorial disease. Multifactorial means more than one cause to it. So you can't point to one thing and say that's the only reason why it's happening. No, it's a combination of all the risk factors. But in terms of obesity, the most common risk factor of all is lifestyle. Exercising too little and eating too much. And the reason why the lifestyle choices are turning bad across the world is because income levels are going up across the world. Disposable income is improving across the world, and that's a good thing. Thanks to the global economy getting more and more efficient, people who lived in absolute poverty not too long ago are actually able to get like office jobs now, so they don't have to work outside as much, or not as many of them have to work outside as much, which means they don't burn off calories like they used to. And then thanks to the global economy, more fatty foods, high carbohydrate foods, and high junk foods, like commercial junk foods, are becoming more available and affordable to them. And then they're able to afford bicycles and then cars, and their buildings have more elevators and escalators. So overall, they are burning less calories per day while they're eating more calories per day. And then they're using some of that disposable income to buy computers and televisions from which they can watch advertisements to tell them to eat more junk food. So it's this cycle, and it's increasing obesity across the world. That's the obesity pandemic. I'd like to add one more out of the box thinking. There's another kind of pandemic that's very much that was out there before the COVID lockdown, but now it's like taking over the world, and it's called the infodemic. So there's no slide on it because it's so new. I just took the course in it over the summer, so I was thinking of making a lecture out of it, but haven't had the time. So infodemic, information epidemic, and it's the fake news. It's the internet promised that anybody could say anything, and the reality is they do. So people say all kinds of stupid and ridiculous and horrible things. The anti-vax community jumped on it, but they existed before the pandemic. But the public resistance to mask and social distancing it provided the fuel to encourage others to become more and more sophisticated in putting the fake news out there. Social engineering, tricking people into believing one story over another story, and it's actually resulting in harmful information, tricking people into doing real harm to their bodies. Celebrities with their favorite products that are not based on science at all is using their popularity to convince people to do real harm to their bodies, and they always have that careful catchphrase to protect them: first consult your doctor. But then in the next breath they go off and tell people not to believe their doctor but to believe them. So the information epidemic is very real, causing real harm, and it's finally being taken seriously. So the World Health Organization has even created this category called infodemic. And this is the idea. Instead of thinking of the internet as just a bunch of machines operated by geeks and used by consumers, think of the information infrastructure, especially the social media landscape, as an ecosystem. And what are the little things living in the ecosystem? Not humans, not insects, but ideas. Memes, M-E-M-E. If ideas are the organism and the social media landscape is the ecosystem, then imagine these ideas living as organisms, doing what organisms do, which is what? Reproduce, spread, eat, feed, defecate, all the functions of life as they try to spread from one human mind to another human mind. How do they make themselves spread from one human mind to another human mind? Well, they make themselves attractive, they make themselves compelling, entertaining, they make themselves trigger an emotion, whatever that emotion is: anger, cuteness, adorability, humor, funny. How many times have you shared a meme that on the face value was just making a joke, but underneath that was suggesting a political message? The joke was that somebody was doing something stupid, isn't that funny? But the underlying political message was that person is a representative of the other group of people you hate, which means that that group of people are stupid. So you saw the meme, you thought it was hilarious, you spread it to other people, your friends, they spread it to other friends, and so the underlying message that that group of people is stupid or evil is also being spread. So don't think of it as the article or the file as the organism. Think of the idea as the organism, looking for fresh minds to occupy. organisms spreading across an ecosystem, and now it's causing a problem, and the problem is the disease. So the World Health Organization is saying, what if we treat fake news and false or misinformation, disinformation as a kind of disease? And what if we use all of our strategies, all of our experience, all of our infrastructure dealing with ordinary diseases and apply it to information diseases? And that's infodemic. Well, that's what I've got so far, but maybe I will share like the skeleton of an outline with this class before the end of the semester. We'll see how much time I have to work on that lecture. Okay, but why did I click on this? So the idea that memes are using your brains as an ecosystem or as a host, and it's jumping from brain to brain, being shared because of its virality, is the subject of this extra credit assignment, the angry video. Okay. Some terminology about dealing with an epidemic chart. So a case is an individual, somebody who got sick. That's a case. Rates, the percentage of an event happening, usually rates of a disease. So if you want to know how many people died because of a certain reason, then you Google for rates of mortality and then the disease. And then you see if CDC or WHO or the NIH or the NSF have any articles on it, maybe some news organization. A good way, so if these if these research articles are a little too boring to read, and you don't feel like, you try to read one of these and your eyes roll to the back of your head and you start yawning and dozing off, what you can do is you can search for the news article, like CBS, NBC, CNN or Fox, depending on your political leanings, BBC, Al Jazeera, Associated Press. So you start with them, and then find, because they are good at putting things in a readable format that is approachable by the ordinary citizen. And then if you want to know more, or you want to double check that they got it right, that they're not just writing about it because they want the clicks, like they're intentionally making clickbait. So what you do then is they will reference the research article that they want to, and you look up that research article and then double check if that research article actually said the thing that the news reporter was claiming they did. So among some rates you can look into are natality, which is birth, how many people were born in a population. Morbidity is sickness, mortality is death, or fatality is death. And then this is always a percentage or per number of people. Because if we said 1 million, if we said 1,000 people died from this disease, you may think, oh my God, 1,000 people died from this disease. Isn't that horrible? We should do something. And then you just leave it at that. Like, you need context. So you click on the article, you read it, it takes you to, and the article wrote it that way as clickbait to make you click on it. So you fell for it. Good job. But then you find out which research report they are referencing. You go into the research report, and now you see that they said 1,000 people in the world died from that disease. Oh, so 1,000 divided by 8 billion population. It doesn't seem that bad anymore. Because there's a lot of things that are mundane every day that kill more than 1,000 people a year all over the world. But if the article instead says 1,000 people in Queens, New York died from this disease, okay, now we've got a problem. Because what's the population of Queens now? Population, Queens, New York. And always check your sources. Nowadays, sometimes the first result is an artificial intelligence summary. And the problem is that AI gets crap wrong. And you'll never know if it is wrong or right if it's a topic you're not familiar with. So there's a saying, this came from, where did it come from? Well, all right, census.gov. Okay, they would know. 2 million, 2.5 million, almost 2.5 million. Okay, so 1,000 people out of 2.5 million. That's a lot. That is a lot. So per million, or something like that. The most common reference number in research, in population, in epidemiology is per 100,000. But don't always assume that. You just be aware that when you look up things like for research for a class or for a project, the numbers they usually depict are numbers per 100,000. At risk is people who might get it, not all the people in the area. After all, if you're doing a study on Alzheimer's dementia, you wouldn't look at the entire population of Queens because the children and young adults, they're not at risk. I haven't heard of a single child getting Alzheimer's dementia. So why would you include them in your calculations, in your reports? You would only include the rates among people of like 40 and above. Even 40 years old is a little low. Okay, prevalence versus incidence. Something I'll test you on, the difference. Prevalence is the total number of people who have the disease. Incidence is the current number who got it. So I said asthma is an endemic, and let's do that. Let's go look up asthma prevalence, New York City. nyc.gov. Okay, so the government of New York City, 1 in 8 adults. Well, I was kind of hoping for an actual total. Oh, this is by state. I guess it didn't have to be New York City, but Department of Health, New York State. That's a good place to. That's a good place for a reliable number. Of 1.4 million adults, 300,000 children had asthma in New York State. So that's the prevalence. It means then that the total number who have it, some of them just got it this year. Some of them have had it all their lives. Some of them may not have it anymore. But today, or when it was checked in 2021, 1.4 million adults and 1/3 of a million children had asthma. Incidence is a new event. Incidence is a new event of a disease. So somebody who never had the disease before suddenly have it now. What do I mean by now? Some time span. The length of time, the window of time doesn't matter as long as you stay consistent. So let's use 1 year intervals. Last year, this person did not have the disease. This year, the person got it. So that's incidence. Last year, 10 people total in the community had the disease. This year, that was the prevalence last year. So the prevalence this year would be the people who already had it plus the person who newly got it, which means the prevalence number will go to what? From 10 to? Anybody good at math? I said one person got it this year. 10 people had it last year, and prevalence means the total number of people who currently have it. So the prevalence is now 11. Very good. You're all very good at math. So prevalence is now 11. And does everybody else understand that? I cannot go higher on the math before you understand that. So the prevalence is all the people who had it last year plus anybody new who gets it this year. Incidence is only the people who newly got it this year. We have last year 100 people have the disease, and then year 1. Year 1. And then we have incidence and prevalence. Last year, nobody new got the disease, but there were 100 people who have it. This year, or year 2, 3 people got the disease. So now, what's now the new prevalence for year 2? Whispering doesn't count. Okay, you have to say it loud and confidently. 103, very good. The new prevalence is 103. Did everybody understand how I got that? It's in the homework. There's a homework assignment on it. There's going to be a test question on this math. I'm going to use different numbers, but the process is the same. Incidence is newly found events for the time period in question. Prevalence is just the total number who have it. Year 3, 5 people got the disease. What happens to the prevalence in year 3? Somebody else. No, somebody else. Somebody who hadn't answered before. And you said it so quietly, I don't think this half of the room heard you. So this half of the room, what's the new prevalence in year 3? Yes. Do you see how I got 108? You guys understand? 103 plus 5 is 108. What? Let's mix it up now. I mean, let's do something funny now. Deaths. People who die from the disease. You know, that's too morbid. Let's call it cured. People who cured. So they went to the hospital and they no longer have the disease. Well, nobody got cured from this group in year 1. Nobody got cured in year 2. And now, oh God, do I have an eraser? Did they? No eraser. Oh well. Now let's say 10 people from year 2 got cured of the disease, so they no longer have it anymore. What will happen to this number? Down by how much? By 10. So it went up by 5, but it went down by 10. So it's 103 plus 5 minus 10. So it's 98. Do you guys see how that happened? Prevalence is the total number of people in the community with the disease in in whatever time period I'm asking for. It's this one or this one. So I can ask, like, what is the after I do all of this, I can say, what's the prevalence in year 1? And you say 100. I can say, what is the incidence in year 2? And you can say 3. So this is how it works. So the prevalence is a total number who have it. It can go up and down. Other ways that the prevalence can go down is if somebody moves out. Somebody moves out of the community. They are no longer on the rolls. They're no longer in the count for this community. They still have the disease. They just don't count for this community, so the number goes down. And like I was being morbid before, if somebody died from the disease, they no longer count as prevalence too. The number would go down. Okay, so that's how that works. Okay, incidence rates, again, so if these rates are by some number, because just the number by itself actually means nothing, it has to be context. So in the population, and then it's usually done as per 100,000, but if you want to call it a percent, you're literally saying number per 100. That's percent. That's what percent really is. So incidence rates, prevalence rates. Oh, I used the word incubation period. What's going on? Incubation period. Well, when you incubate an egg, what are you doing? You go to a farm and you see a cabinet with a yellow light in it, and you say, full of eggs, and you say, what are those? Why does a door feel warm? Aren't you supposed to keep the eggs in the refrigerator? And the farmer says, no, we're incubating them. What is he saying? Or she saying? Incubating is what? In the plain English, not the epidemiology definition, but the plain English definition. Yeah, letting it develop until it hatches. So take that idea and now apply to a disease. Incubation period is the time between the exposure to the risk factor and then the development of symptoms, or the person actually shows the signs of getting a disease. For example, COVID. When somebody with COVID sneezes into your open mouth, about how long would it take? So somebody with COVID is wearing a mask, but they're wearing it this way. You seen these people? And so they walk in front of you, and suddenly they sneeze, and a gob of snot shoots out their nose into your mouth. On average, how long would it take for you to start showing the symptoms of COVID yourself? And you've heard this number. What? Oh, somebody said 7 days? I heard it longer. 14 days. You've heard this number again. If you think you've been exposed to COVID, then you should self-isolate for at least 14 days. If you still don't have any signs after 14 days, you are allowed to return to work. That's how it goes. Where did that 14 come from? It's the laboratory confirmed incubation period of COVID. From the day you were exposed until you start to show the symptoms of it. Anybody know the incubation period of HIV? HIV/AIDS, from being exposed to the HIV virus to actually start showing the symptoms of AIDS. Artificial intelligence, 6 weeks. I've heard it longer, but who said this? National Center for Infectious Disease. Okay, well, SG, is that Singapore? See, always double check your sources. I'm not saying that people in Singapore don't know what they're doing. I was hoping for a US or a WHO report. Australia says 1 to 4 weeks. All right, so about 4-6 weeks. That means that, now that doesn't mean the virus is not active. As soon as you're infected with HIV, Can somebody close the door? They're practicing. That just because once you get the virus in you, you are now able to spread it to others. Your infectivity is immediate. As soon as that one virus that got in you starts making more viruses for itself, you can now share that with other people. So once you get exposed, once you get the virus in you, you can start sharing it. But your body doesn't show the signs and symptoms until 4 weeks or 6 weeks, as they say. Which means that if two people have unprotected sex, and one gives the HIV virus to the other, and it's like an open relationship, that new person, the new host, if they continue to have unprotected sex with other people, they'll continue to give it to other people until they finally feel something is wrong, and they go to a doctor and they get diagnosed. But by 4 6 weeks later, they've been with other people, and they've been able to spread it around before they can, in good conscience, start behaving themselves. So that's incubation period. An epidemic curve now. So what happens is somebody shows up at the hospital, reports their symptoms, doctor says that's really interesting, they write it down, and then these patient care reports are totaled and tabulated by the hospital administration and shared with the local public health office. So the local public health office is getting these hospital reports daily, and they plot like known diseases on the charts. And then one day, a public health official is looking at one of the charts, and they're seeing something that looks like this. Not this part. They're seeing something that looks like this. So the number is starting to creep up, and they go, that's interesting. And then a couple of days later, the graph reaches here. And then so this guy is saying, oh my God, we have an epidemic on our hands. And they calls the supervisor, take a look at this graph. And they're seeing this upshot of number of cases. And we're saying, first they call it an outbreak, and then they call it an epidemic. The incubation period is here, as you can see. So the exposure, these numbered days is just hypothetical. So the exposure is on day 2, and then the first hospital complaint appears on day 6. So the incubation period is how many days? Test question. 4 days. See that? Because the exposure was day 2, and then 4 days later, day 6, that was the first report at the local hospital. And then since then, more and more people start reporting it. Okay, some definitions now. Common source is so the public health office starts reading all of these healthcare reports in detail, and they're noticing that all of these people who are complaining are saying that they had this one thing in common. They all ate from this restaurant in all of their histories. So that could be a common source. They all got it from the same place. Now, if the restaurant made a bad batch of mayonnaise and they used it up in one day, so not only did all of these patients eat at the same place, but only the people who ate on that one day got sick, and people who ate the day before and day after had no complaints. That's point source. One place, one time, that's it. But if people kept getting sick every time they go to this restaurant, no matter which day it is, it's continuous source. That makes sense, right? Similarly, if a local factory is dumping toxic waste into the river, and the people who live on the shore downstream from it is having these health complaints, that's again common source. And if it's one dump, it's a point source. If the factory keeps dumping continuously, that's continuous source. Propagated is when the people who got sick spread it to other people. So like a respiratory infection. You get it, you give it to 2 people. They give it to 2 people, they give it to 2 people, and it just multiplies exponentially there. That's propagated. So here's the typical infection curve. there's an exposure, and this is a infection, but it could be any disease. It spreads, but then at some point, it literally runs out of people. That's the top curve. The number of people who are not yet infected are running out. So the rise tapers off, slows down, and then levels off. And then, with no more people to infect, then look at the current people infected. They'll either get cured, or they will die, or they will move away out of the community. So the number of newly infected people are being outpaced by the number of people who no longer have the disease, and the rates roll down here. Until, at some point, if they never control it, then it'll stay at a steady, slow burn from then on, and that becomes an endemic. Where? Why? I just said that they ran out of people to infect. So where are these new people coming from that can be infected and maintain the rates up as the previously infected people are either dying, getting cured, or moving away? Any guesses? There's two most typical sources of new people to infect. Any guesses? Babies, so the newly born, and then one other one. How else can you add to a community? Fresh people to a community. Somebody else. How else can you add new people to a community? You can make your own with babies. What's another way? I've got 20 more slides. I got 10 more slides to go, and I'm still going to cover them. So I think you know, you're just too shy to speak up. Immigration. Yeah, people move in from the next town over. So there's always a constant trickle of new people entering the community, getting sick, and so that maintains the endemic. All right. What happened with COVID? Well, here's the problem. COVID was so deadly. It didn't kill everybody, but it had a high mortality rate. It had a high morbidity rate, high rates of people getting sick. Not everybody who got COVID needed to go to the hospital. Not everybody who got COVID in the hospital died, but higher rates than a typical respiratory infection. And the numbers were so high that hospitals were running out of beds. Hospital staff were running out of hours. They were getting exhausted. Some of them were doing overnight shifts, extended shifts, and they had to go home. They had families to go to. They had to go to the bathroom. They were running out of person hours of time taking care of these COVID people. So what happens to somebody who needs a bed but doesn't get one? What happens to somebody who needs a ventilator but doesn't get one? Well, these are life-saving devices, so if you don't get one, then you're going to die. The red line, it represents a hypothetical capacity of a healthcare system. This is the total number of beds available in the hospital in the area. That's it. You don't get another one. You can't throw a cot in the middle of the hallway and call it a bed. Okay, a hospital bed is a very specific term, has some very specific needs, criteria. So if you run out of beds and the next person comes into the hospital, needs a bed, they don't get one, they're not going to get the treatment they need, they're going to die. The red area then is the curve above the capacity of the hospital to handle this outbreak, this epidemic. Now, in the ancient days, the old days, what would they do with people who died who couldn't be taken care of? Well, they would be thrown out into the street. Well, they wouldn't have hospitals, but the people who couldn't be taken care of were thrown out into the street. And then you have movies that show carts of dead bodies and somebody saying, "Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!" And there was a black plague. See, did we have bodies in the streets in New York during the lockdown? No, of course not. We're more sophisticated than that. We're more civilized than that. Where do we put our bodies that overwhelm the hospital system and the processing systems to deal with dead bodies? Anybody remember those stories? The morgue, right, but the morgue was overflowing with people dying.
Like they were making like refrigerators.
Yeah, they were parking refrigerator trucks outside of hospitals to keep the bodies in until the morgue system was able to process them and get them to the funerals and all that. So that's what would have happened. So this little thing here says no public health effort. That's the worst case scenario, all these dead people. So what can we do as public health officials to not have so many people die during a very deadly public outbreak? Well, there's this phrase now, flatten the curve. And this is what they're saying. If you've heard the word flatten the curve, this is where it came from. If we take this top part and just push it down somehow, just bring it down to below the red line, then the number of people who need beds will be equal to the number of beds available. The people who need intensive care will get it. The people who need ventilators will get it. The people who need a nurse will find a nurse who has the spare capacity. So that's what flatten the curve means. Now you see how the epidemic curve will slope down like this as the number of people who had the disease either got cured, moved away, or died. You see how the curve slope down is not so steep, it stays out there. What's happening is if we delay somebody from getting infected sooner, it's with a virus this virulent, it'll just mean that they'll get infected later. So what we've done is squish the curve down and spread it out. But if somebody who was going to be infected on this day got infected on this day instead, it's okay because a bed was available, a ventilator was available, a nurse was available, a doctor was available. As long as we keep the curve under the red line, it's okay no matter when you got sick, no matter when you got infected. So how do we flatten the curve? Masks, social distancing, vaccines, where vaccines don't 100% prevent you from getting the virus. Vaccines only slow it down, reduce the chance you will get it, delay the chance you will get it, reduce the severity if you do get it. It just pushes the curve down. That's what vaccines do. So in reality, that's the best case scenario. This is the worst case scenario. What happened in real life? The real life looked more like this. There was some flattening of the curve, but not enough. And a lot of people were shoved out into the hallway of the hospital, sitting on makeshift cots. We did have refrigerator trucks to hold the dead bodies, waiting for their turn at the morgue. So public health tried to do what they could. Part of it was the public pushback, refusing to wear masks or not wearing them properly. Part of it was a public pushback, refusing to distance socially, but not doing it a good job. But part of it was the virus was so new, we didn't know how to handle it. It's called a novel virus, the COVID virus. It's novel, meaning new, and that's why it caught healthcare and science by surprise. That's why it took so long for the science response, because it was a new virus. New, it's called COVID-19. What happened to COVID 1 through 18? It's just a name. Like, if your king is called King John III, it means he's the third king named John. And you had a King John II and a King John I. They're totally different people. It's just a sequence of names. So COVID-17 and 18 and COVID-16 are totally different viruses. It's just the name. COVID-19 was brand new, is catching everybody by surprise. Remember I said that if you're studying Alzheimer's in Queens, you don't want to study the infants. The chances they will get Alzheimer's is just zero. So if you include the entire population of Queens, that's a crude rate. If you include only the people at risk, you're adjusting it. So only look at people 40 or 50 and above. You're adjusting the population so you get a more useful number out of it. Okay. Life expectancy is the average length of time. Life expectancy now is about 76 to 77 years old. It doesn't mean everybody has a 77 expiration date. It means that half the people born today will make it to 77 and older. Half the people born today won't make it to 77. Then the years of potential life lost to a disease is the years that people don't make to 77. So let's say, just hypothetically, disease shortens the life expectancy to 67. Then the YPLL for that disease is 10 years. Because if they did not get the disease, they would have lived to 77 on average, but because they got the disease, their average among the people who have it tends to live only to 67. So they lost 10 potential years of life. That's YPLL. Here are some other numbers that you will likely run into in an epidemiology report. And here's the breakdown. So somebody born here was supposed to make it to 76, just hypothetically here, as the general population. But because of the disease, they only lived to 65, so the YPLL is 76 minus 65, it's 11. But we're not only talking about the quantity of life, we're also thinking about the quality of life. Because people with a disease, especially a serious disease, tend to live the last years of their life very, very sick, needing extra help, in pain, suffering. The medications they're taking are causing side effects. So that's years of disability. So the years living with disability, YDL, is the average years that the people started feeling symptoms and started to get their quality of life impaired up until they typically died. So that's the YLD. And then the HALE, healthy life expectancy, the years they lived without any complaints, without needing any medical intervention before the disease required them to start taking meds, start showing up at the surgeons, is for this one 50 here. So this is how it breaks out. Use this chart to figure out how to answer this homework question. I did warn you that epidemiology, public health is lots of math. But I promise that this is it. This is all the math you are going to do this semester. I'm just front loading it. So this homework assignment is going to be a little tough for those of you who are not comfortable with math. This is just some more research sources that you may end up using in the future. Descriptive versus analytic studies. This is the analytic is just a different name for experimental. Descriptive is more about the observational. And you've heard those two words before, right? Descriptive versus observational, and experimental versus analytic. This is from your basic science lecture. So that was the week 2 lecture. So I won't explain it again. Something new for you this lecture is retrospective versus prospective study. As an upper class person, as a graduate student, you may hear that the article you're reading about is a prospective study. It means it takes a bunch of people and follows them into the future. So they promise to fill out a diary and keep mailing those diaries to the researcher every year, every 5 years, whatever they agreed to. A retrospective study is you take a group of people and then you get a detailed history. What did you do last year? What did you do 2 years ago? What did you do 3 years ago? Yeah, open the door for, and then, so retrospective is looking in the past of what they did. Prospective is following somebody into the future of what they might do. The last slide is reminders. Go back to the basic science lecture and refresh your memory on each one of these because they're tested. Okay, sorry for using up an extra minute of your time, but you now heard enough from me to try the homework and quiz. So good luck on that. You'll see me next week